He worked on a growth model and the global constraint of metabolism. Uh, so without further ado, let's welcome Tetsuhiro. Yes, please.
Yes, can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Due to bad cold, my throat is really inflamed, and so I'm sorry if I cough during my seminar. Okay, and yeah, okay. Thank you for give a chance to talk in such a very interesting seminar series. And now, yeah, I'm a member of the Earth Life Science Institute in the Institute of Science Tokyo, and Eric Smith is also the member of the Earth Life Science Institute. Okay, and yeah, our institute is kind of the institute between the planetary science and life science. And one of the mission in our institute is study life in the universe. However, we don't just now, just yet, we don't know in outside of us there is other lives, but yeah, my question is however, actually, if there are another organism in life in the, outside of the Earth, like this ET. So, yeah, actually, so without studying ET directly, we can know the ETs because, yeah, actually, so if we understand life itself, and if we know the universality of life, we can understand the ETs. And yeah, I think that one of the purpose of this seminar, autocatalytic net seminar, will be kind of the understanding the universality of life. And yeah, actually, so then why is a universal feature in life? So yeah, we don't know the actual ET, but yeah, actually we hope that maybe some, even if there is a life form outside of us, maybe they will be composed of unit in the us, the unit itself, and maybe they are composed of unit. And if we consider their life, then they should grow. And to grow, some element must be incorporated from outside. Yeah, this is due to the thermodynamics. So if there should be organism, there should be life, they should have a metabolic systems. And also, yeah, unit growing faster are easier to copy themselves. And because of the thermodynamic limit, copying is not perfect. So then evolution must be occur in life form outside of life, us. So to understand, for example, metabolism, growth, and evolution, yeah, we can understand the universal feature of life. And today, I will introduce my study about the universality in metabolism and growth. And at first, I will introduce our study of metabolism. And but usually the metabolism is very complicated, and the very species independent. For example, the E. coli doesn't have a photosynthesis system. but cyanobacteria have photosynthesis. And actually, so even in the life form in us, even bacteria, they have a very diverse metabolic system and also very complicated. Yeah, you know that this is a kind of the metabolic networks. And yeah, actually it's really complicated and yeah. So question is there some kind of universality in such a complicated and very diverse metabolic system? And nowadays, prediction metabolic state is usually done by constraint-based modeling. Flux balance analysis is one of constraint-based modeling. But yeah, you know the constraint-based modeling is optimization in reaction flux space. And to solve the problem, we should know detailed information for reaction and true objective function. And actually, but this is difficult to know for example, detailed information for reaction. We know somewhat detailed information for E. coli. However, if we want to know some new bacteria, it is very hard to know the detailed reaction networks. And also, we cannot know the true objective function was cell optimized. And the point is the result of the prediction is very sensitive to these information. So even in such condition, is there some kind of the universal phenomena? And we change our approach from the predicting of the metabolic state itself. Instead of that, we try to predicting the metabolic response. It is similar to the sorry. It is similar to the in the case of the phase transition in StatMech, transition temperature, critical temperature itself is hard to predict. However, the response around in the vicinity of the critical temperature have a very universal feature. So, and yeah, we started, yeah, and also we found universal response. Yeah, I will introduce later. We started from the constraint-based modeling in reaction flux space. But by using the transformation of matrix, yeah, from the reaction flux space to pathway flux space, pathway is linked series of reaction. Yeah, for example, in the constraint-based modeling, we focus on every single reaction. However, we focus on the, for example, fermentation pathways or photosynthetic pathway or respiration pathway. We focus on pathway. And by focusing on pathway, this is a constraint, most general formalism of constraint-based modeling. Actually, that the first term is maximization of some objective function. And the second equation is production and consumption should be balanced for every reaction. And also other kind of the constraint is introducing this term. For example, the protein allocation. And the final term, consumption should not exceed the influx. And this is a optimization problem in the stoichiometry matrix, in the reaction space. And we can transform into the pathway flux space. This is an optimization problem in pathway flux space. This mean function in the point is this mean function. This is called Leontief function in economics. This means there is one objective function, objective reaction, kind of cellular growth or production of some chemical species or other kind of objective reaction. We don't need to know the exact objective reaction, but actually it's to maximize the such objective reaction. For example, to maximize the cellular cell growth, cell should produce, for example, DNA, RNA, protein, lipid, and some sugars. However, if one of the component is much larger than required content, required amount, it is not useful. For example, if DNA is not produced, but the lipid is produced more and more, it is not of optimized state. So, to optimize cellular growth, the cell should produce all of the component in the equal amount of the current cell composition. And if there are much more component, XLL component, this is not good. And this mean function is for example, some kind of growth rate is limited the minimum amount of the required component. Okay. And this term is very similar. Actually, so this is a flux of path, and this is a stoichiometry matrix for path. And each path, actually is the flux of each path cannot exceed the influx. This is a condition, and this is condition. Okay, so this is the transformation of the constraint-based modeling. And we call this formalism as a microeconomic formalism. Because, actually, so this formalism is well used in economics. And in economics, economic agents are assumed to optimize their benefit. And also in metabolism, cell is considered to be optimized some reaction, usually a growth rate. But for example, in the metabolic engineering, some optimization function is, for example, production of some chemical component. In any case, through the evolution, metabolic system is considered to be optimized. And actually, so this formalism is quite similar to the formalism used in economics. And the point is this mean function. This mean function is, as I already said, this is a requirement, special requirement from metabolic system, because the metabolic system have a low mass conservation. And this is a correspondence. In microeconomics, optimization function is called utility, and in metabolism, this is kind of the, for example, growth rate. And in microeconomics, income, our income is correspond to intake of nutrient in metabolic system. And goods in economics correspond to each metabolic pathway. For example, some coffee and tea is an individual good in economics. And a fermentation, respiration pathway is individual goods in metabolic system. And demand for goods is correspond to the allocation of nutrient for each pathway. And the price of goods correspond to inefficiency of metabolism. Actually, it is a little bit technical, but actually, if the price of goods is very high, we should pay more money to get the same amount of goods. So it means that if the price is high, sorry. Ability to transform from money to goods is very ineffective. So price of goods is correspond to inefficiency of metabolism. And also actually in microeconomics, complementarity is very important. And for example, the complementarity means goods cannot be substituted by other goods. For example, the right shoe and left shoe is very complementary, have a high complete complementarity. It means the left shoe doesn't substitute right shoe. And also in metabolism case, due to the mass conservation, each pathway cannot substitute other pathway. So this corresponds to stoichiometry in metabolic system.
Hatakeyama-san, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So in the formula that you showed, could you go on that slide again?
This one?
Yeah, what exactly is the O on the denominator, S alpha O?
Yeah. S alpha O is S is a stoichiometry for reaction. Here we consider this capital O is some kind of objective reaction. Okay. And actually there are multiple pathways, but finally, in the constraint-based modeling, objective function is objective reaction. For example, in the constraint-based modeling, we consider the growth itself as a one reaction. It requires multiple metabolite, DNA, RNA, protein, water,
Okay.
blah blah blah. But actually, but required amount is very different for very different metabolite. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
example,
thank you.
yeah.
So O is the objective reaction, and S alpha is the stoichiometry of the good and the objective reaction.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
S alpha O is a kind of some,
Yeah, interestingly, if S alpha is 0, then I guess you have a minus infinity, which is what the minimum will be.
But actually, in this case, such a reaction doesn't incorporate it in the objective reaction because such a good doesn't require.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And the point of why such a economic formalism is important is because by using such economic formalism, we can use mathematical technique in economics. And here we use the Slutsky equation in in microeconomics. The Slutsky equation is some kind of the decomposition of change in the demand by changing due to changing price into some kind of substitution effect and income effect. Substitution effect is very easy to understand. For example, if the price of the beef is increased, we will buy instead of chicken or instead of pork. This is some kind of substitution. And income effect mean if the price of beef increased, however, we want to beef, then actually our income is effectively decreased because due to the money we should pay for beef. So this is income effect. And point is, in economic case, as I said, there is a law of mass conservation. Then every metabolic pathway cannot be substituted by others. So only income effect remain. Finally, we get such a equation. This is completely the same as the previous one, but there is no substitution. And left-hand side of this equation of response to metabolic inhibition. This F is flux of pathway. This P of the inefficiency of pathway. And this right-hand side is response to nutrient condition. This I is influx of some nutrient. And this F is also the pathway flux. And from that, we immediately predict if some pathway, flux of pathway, some chemical pathway is, for example, increase if we increase nutrient. So this term is positive. Then this term should be negative. In this case, if we inhibit some reaction, then such a flux will decrease. And if we decrease a nutrient, and in this case, if some pathway decrease, and in this case, this term is negative, and negative times negative should be positive, then this term is positive. It means, surprisingly, if we inhibit that pathway will increase. And geometrically, this equation is represented by such a landscape. Due to law of mass conservation, such a optimization function of metabolism have some very clear edge, and this response to nutrient condition correspond to increasing edge. However, if inhibit some reaction, the state will go to the different side on the same edge. So this quantitative relationship should be universal in every metabolic system. And we can show one of the very interesting example called Warburg effect. And Warburg effect is all organism utilize the less energetically efficient fermentation instead of respiration. even in the presence of oxygen. And due to this Warburg effect, for example, our cancer cell use more fermentation, and this is bad for us, but also due to this Warburg effect, we can drink alcohol because the yeast use fermentation in the presence of oxygen. And yeah, I will step. And it means, and it is known in the Warburg effect, during the Warburg effect, if we increase carbon intake, then flux of respiration will decrease. So this term is negative. From that, if we inhibit respiration, we can predict flux of respiration should be increased universally. And we check in the old papers, and we found in the yeast case and in the cancer case, if we add some inhibition agent of the respiration, okay, even in the efficiency of the ATP generation in respiration decrease, but organism use more respiration in the presence of the inhibitor agent. So we found some universality in metabolic system. And from that, we also found universal feature in growth. And in previous study, we focus on local edge, but if we consider this optimization function is growth rate, if there is some universal law of whole landscape, then there will be some universal feature of the growth rate, growth curve, against the nutrient amount. And one of the famous growth law in the growth rate during against the nutrient availability is called mono law. And mono law is represented by the similar to the Arrhenius law, Michaelis-Menten law. And mono equation capture universal feature of cellular growth. One is monotonicity. The cellular growth rate is monotonically increased with nutrient availability. And another one is concavity. It means there is a diminished return to getting more and more of nutrient. It means the increased rate of growth rate itself will be decreased with the nutrient availability. However, the point is mono growth rate cannot always capture the actual cellular growth. This is an experimental result by the this is one of the actual growth rate curve. And in this growth curve have a sharp curve in this point, and this cannot be followed the mono growth rate. And also, other point is mono growth rate law cannot capture the existence of variety of nutrient. But we can show from the such a landscape of the growth curve, we show such a monotonicity and concavity is quite universal. But the reason of the concavity is very different from the mono growth rate. In our case, at first, if nutrient is low, scarce, there is no constraint for growth. But if growth, there are more nutrient, one of the constraint appear, and number of constraint is increasing and increasing. Then growth rate show universal concavity. And we call this as a global constraint principle. And yeah, our global constraint principle is generalized version of Liebig's law of the minimum. Maybe you know the Liebig's law of minimum. It is that maybe you know this Liebig's value. This is a kind of metaphor of the Liebig's law of minimum. In this value, growth rate of some organism is determined by the lowest plank of the barrel. And each plank corresponds to some kind of resource, nitrogen, phosphate, and for example, sunlight, blah, blah, blah. But actually, this original Liebig's law of minimum cannot capture the growth kinetics. And instead of that, we propose a new kind of metaphor, terraced Liebig's barrel. In this barrel, there are some kind of terrace, and it is mathematically correct. Growth rate is the height of water, and resource amount of the resource, for example, the glucose is the amount of water. And if the resource is low, amount of resource is low, the area, the surface area is very small, then growth rate, water height can easy to increase, but there is some terrace. So if growth rate, resource is more increased, the rate of increase in growth rate itself should be decreased. And finally, the growth rate have a plateau in the other scarcest growth resource. Okay, kind of this. And also, actually, this kind of the terraced Liebig value can capture the growth rate dependence on multiple nutrient. If we decrease some of other nutrient than S, then, for example, the place of terrace also decrease. Then growth rate can decrease at the lower nutrient source. And this well consistent with the experimental result. Okay, maybe time is over. So this is our conclusion. So we revisited several phenomenological laws in cellular growth. One is mono growth law. This is 80 years old, very old law. And the other one is Liebig's law minimum. This is more older than Monod's law. This is 180 years old. And we can integrate these classical growth law. And we now find very universal law of growth. Okay. This is a conclusion. Yeah, here we can find some universal feature in metabolism growth. And now I try to find some kind of universal feature in evolution. Okay, this work is collaborated with Junpei Yamagishi. He is now postdoc in Riken, but he will move to US from June. And my today's talk is now we wrote a chapter in this textbook. David also wrote some chapters in textbook, and please look this textbook if you know the detail. Okay, thank you.